Okay, so is my screen visible to everybody?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, yesterday we have seen how to calculate the longitudinal and transverse reinforcement for a axially loaded short column. We have completed one example in which we calculated the longitudinal reinforcement as well as transverse reinforcement, which actually includes the calculation of lateral ties. And second problem we completed for spiral reinforcement. Now we will see one problem which is completely based on the design of a column. So in earlier two problems which yesterday we have solved, the dimensions of the column and other details were given. We were only expected to calculate the longitudinal and transverse steel. Now this is the problem in which actually we are supposed to design the entire column. Now when we design the entire column, it means we have to decide its dimension, and for deciding the dimension we need to calculate the load acting on that particular column, and accordingly then we have to decide the dimensions and then further decide the reinforcement. So this is the problem statement. I will just read the problem statement. Design an axially loaded short column at F as shown in figure in ground floor and below plinth for a G+2 building with following details. Floor to floor height is 3 meter, depth of foundation below ground level is 1.2 meter, height of plinth is 0.6 meter, live load on all slabs is 4 kilonewton per meter square, floor finish load is 1.5 kilonewton per meter square, waterproofing load on roof slab is 2 kilonewton per meter square, wall thickness 230 mm, slab thickness 120 mm, height of parapet wall 1 meter, size of beams 230 by 500 mm, material M25 and Fe415 used. Show detailed load and design calculations and reinforcement details in plan and sectional elevation. So for this problem statement, this is the given diagram. We are supposed to design a column at this location F. Okay, so there are total 5 slabs in a particular floor, and these are the different columns marked as A, B, C, D, or given as named as A, B, C, D. We are expected to design column F. Okay, now when we design the column F, now in your term work, what you are exactly expected to do, that you have to first design the slabs. Okay, so you'll complete first the design of S1 slab, S2 slab, S3, S4, S5. Then whatever the load coming from slab, you will transfer to all the beams, corresponding beams. Okay, suppose from S1 your load will get transferred to the beam BF. Similarly from S2, see if you observe, these are the two-way slabs. So from S2 the load is again transferred to BF. Okay, similarly for analyzing the beam, whatever the reaction of the beam coming, that you will apply on a column as a load, and for that load you will design the column, right? So for designing column F here, I have to find out what is the reaction coming from BF, what is the reaction coming from EF, what is the reaction coming from KF or JF, and what is the reaction coming from GF. And addition of all these four reactions will be the total load acting on my column located at F. And for that load, I am supposed to design the column. This is the actual process. But when such type of problems are asked, you can imagine how much time it will take to design the column located at F. That you have to design these slabs, then find out what is the load acting, or at least you have to find out what is the load coming from every slab on the beam. Then analyze the beam and find out the reaction and then calculate it. Instead of that, there is one approximate method for finding the load acting directly on the column F. Okay, and in that approximate load, we actually do not consider that the load coming from two-way slab is distributed to the beam in a trapezoidal area, because we consider it as this as a trapezium, this as a second trapezium, or BF beam will get a load transferred from S1 with some trapezium like this. Then from some trapezium like this, the load will go on this beam. Triangular portion load will go on this beam, and from this triangular portion load will come to EF. Okay, instead of
आणि
considering,
स्लॅब तर स्क्वेअर शेप आहे ना, मग सगळे ट्रायंग्युलर येतील ना.
हा सगळे ट्रायंग्युलर येतील किंवा जर थोडं आता वेगळं डायमेन्शन असेल, हा असेल 3/4, तर in that case there will be a trapezoidal load. But for approximate method, instead of considering trapezium or triangular, we simply consider a half rectangular acting on these slabs, and that rectangular load we transfer on the column F. So like this, if you consider this diagram, so the rectangular load coming from this slab, coming from this slab, coming from this and this slab, it is considered, it is simply a 1/4 piece of the entire slab. The load coming from this 1/4 piece on the column. Similarly, from this corner, from this corner and from this corner. So if you compare the area of this rectangular portion with the trapezoidal load or a triangular load, whatever you will calculate, actually by considering the dimensions, this load always come higher. And hence, actually you are designing a column to the conservative side. You are increasing the load and you are designing for that increased load. No doubt that the design will be uneconomical, but many time economy is not important as compared to safety of the structure. Or when you design any particular structure, there is a risk involved. If your design somewhere goes wrong, you may result, or your design may result to the collapse of a part of the structure or entire structure, which may result into loss of life. So in practice, we never design exactly like whatever is the theoretical procedure. We always go to the conservative side of design, and in that case economy we keep little bit aside. Okay, so this is approximate method. See this problem statement which I have shown you, such type of problems are asked in were asked in earlier exams. That is when right now your examination pattern is different. You have to give the end semester examination for 30 marks. But when I appeared for the examination and when I have given this particular subject exam, I wrote 100 marks theory paper. Okay, and for that such type of problems were asked. So this gives us the entire, or it requires the full knowledge how the load is transferred from slab to the beam to the column, or even if that much time is not available, how we can directly transfer the load from slabs and beams to the column, and how to design the column quickly. Okay, for that this is the approximate method. Now just go through this diagram and this diagram. This is the elevation, rather section given besides the plan. It is actually a G+2 structure, and we are supposed to design the ground floor column. So this is my ground floor, and I'm designing this particular column. This is the first floor, second floor, and this is the terrace. So for designing this column, um, can anybody tell me which column, if I'm considering 1, 2, 3, or ground floor, first floor, second floor, these are the G+2 story structure. I'm considering this as a first column, this as a second column, this as a third column. Okay, and this actually this should be the first, second, third, fourth. So out of these 4 columns, which column will be subjected to maximum load? Can anybody tell me?
First column.
First column.
First
Ground.
column, which is below the plinth level, right?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Because on this particular portion or on this particular column, the entire load of the structure is acting. On this particular column, the load from first floor, second floor and terrace is acting. On the first floor column, the load from second and terrace is only acting. And for second floor column, the load coming from terrace is only acting. So even if you consider any construction site, and if you observe a particular column right from ground floor up to the terrace, the dimension of the column goes on reducing because the load acting on that column is reduced, and because of that we can reduce the size of the column marginally, and in that fashion we achieve the economy. Okay, so when we calculate the load, when we do the design in that, if even if we have not considered the economy at the time of construction, automatically we are considering the economy because the loads are getting reduced as we go upwards. Okay, so now as suppose you have a very less time for the design, and I don't have a time to design all these 3 or 4 columns separately. So what I will do, I will normally design this particular column, which is the heaviest one or which is subjected to the highest load, and the same design I'm providing for all upper columns. This is again going to be uneconomical. Okay, my design is going to be uneconomical, but again it will be on a more conservative side. Practically we do not do that. We whatever the load, for that only we calculate the load and we design the column for that load only. Little bit load is increased to consider the design on a conservative side. Okay, but for this particular example, I have considered that I'm designing this column by considering all the entire load coming from the floor. Now, if you consider this design of a column, what is the height of this column? Above the ground, below the ground, the height is 1.2 meter, and above the ground up to plinth, the height is 0.6. So total height of the column up to plinth level is 1.2 plus 0.6. It is 1.8. If I want to design this column, I will design for 1.8 meter height. But if I want to provide the same design for upper floor columns, the length of the column is different there. The length of all other floor columns is 3 meter. Okay, so when I design the column, I will consider the load acting on this particular column, that is the column below the plinth level, and I will consider the height of the first floor column. Okay, so that the same design I can provide here. Okay, this type of adjustments are always done in practice in the design of the structures. Is it clear to everybody how we are considering the load, approximate load calculation, and how we are designing a column? Is it clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Now moving to the next step, that first one, that we have to consider the load calculation. Now, as I have explained, the load coming from the slabs we will consider in the form of a rectangular part. So if I will go back to this diagram, this is the first slab. Okay, the dimension of this slab is 3 by 3 meter. I have considered only this part. So 1/4 piece of the slab, its dimension will be half from this side and half from this side. So it is 1.5 by 1.5. So area of this particular piece of a slab, or the area from slab S1, the load coming from this particular area will be calculated as 1.5 by 1.5 meter. Similarly, if you consider this slab, S2 slab, it is again 1.5 by 1.5. This is S3, this is S4, if I'm not wrong. From S4, that is this particular slab, the dimensions along this x direction is 3 meter, and along y it is half of 1.2, it is 0.6. Okay, and for S5, that is slab number 5, again consider this dimension, half of this, so half of 4 is 2, and this is 1.5, so 1.5 by 2. So all these values are considered here. For S1, it is 1.5 by 1.5, S2 again 1.5 by 1.5, S4 0.6 by 1.5, and S5 2 by 1.5. All these areas of the slabs are considered from which the load will act on the column. So the total area is coming as 8.4 meter square. Then the load coming from the roof slab. Now, what are the different parameters which will constitute against the total load acting on a column? The first one is the dead load. The second one is the self weight. Normally dead load and self weight comes together. Third one is dead load may include the floor finish. Okay, and the third one is the live load. Okay, now on the roof slab, if you consider roof slab, what are the type of loads acting on the roof slab? It will be the self weight of that roof slab, plus on the roof we provide a waterproofing layer, so waterproofing load plus live load. Okay, so that entire load is will be coming from the roof slab. So the self weight of the roof slab is considered as 25 as unit weight of the RC. Yesterday, sorry, I'm moving to the quickly moving to the another point. Yesterday, after finishing the lecture, some students showed me IS 875 part 2, right? And we were discussing about the load for tiles floor finish.
Yes, ma'am.
So whatever the values you have shown me now, those are the unit weight values. Those are not 1 kilonewton per meter square direct loads. Those are the unit weight values. So if I want to find out the load coming from tiles, I have to consider the area multiplied by unit weight of that material multiplied by thickness of that material. Right? Area means, thickness and dimensions. Dimension we normally consider 1 meter. So 1 meter width multiplied by thickness of a tile multiplied by unit weight, that will give me the floor finish load. So either you calculate floor finish load in this fashion, or you can assume directly the value as 1 kilonewton per meter square. Okay?
Okay, ma'am.
Huh.
And also, waterproofing load is only taken on the roof. So the
You
design
have,
will be also different for slabs at roof and slab at floor level.
yes.
In
You
our
do not,
design case also.
yes. Because on the terrace, you normally do not provide tiles, na? Ceramic tiles and marble tiles, whatever the tiles you provide inside your rooms.
Yes,
Similar
ma'am.
type of tiles are not there on the roof. So
Yes.
there we have to consider only the waterproofing load, or what is called as COBA.
Okay.
Okay. So self weight is calculated here as 25 as unit weight of the RC multiplied by its thickness. Thickness of slab is given as 120 mm. This is, and per meter width we calculate. So it is multiplied by 1. Plus waterproofing load is directly given as 2. Live load is directly given as 4. So the total load coming from roof slab is 9 kilonewton per meter square. Now the load from floor slab, it will be again self weight plus floor finish. Now instead of waterproofing, it will be floor finish plus live load. So again the self weight plus floor finish plus live load, the total load is 8.5. Okay. Now the total load coming from the slabs will be 9 from roof slab, 8.5 plus 8.5. Why plus? Because there are two floors. So one roof slab, second floor, first floor. Okay, so that's why it is added 2 times, 8.5, 8.5. So this is the total load. It is per meter square. Multiplied by the area, it will give me the load into kilonewton. Always keep in mind, we design the slabs for UDL, we design beams for UDL, but we design columns always for point load. We do not calculate the load in UDL for columns. Columns are always designed for point load or a moment depending upon the situation. Okay, is it clear how the load is calculated coming from slab? This is the approximate method. Is it clear, guys?
Yes, ma'am.
मॅम
Huh?
आपण हा कॉलम सगळ्यात खालच्या बेस साठी करत आहोत, म्हणजे फाउंडेशनच्या पण खाली.
फाउंडेशनच्या
ना?
खाली नाही रे बाळा,
नाही म्हणजे
फाउंडेशनच्या वर,
फाउंडेशन मध्ये, बरोबर.
ग्राउंड फ्लोअरच्या खाली.
हा ग्राउंड फ्लोअरच्या खाली. सो आता ग्राउंड फ्लोअर जे आहे तर त्याचा पण टाईल लोड नाही येणार का मग, जसं ह्याच्यात 2 केलेलं आहे.
हे लोड, त्या टाईलचं लोड ना तुझ्या ह्याच्यावर जाईल ना, बीम वर जाईल.
हा
बर, पण मग तू आता इथे स्लॅबच नसतो ना ग्राउंड फ्लोअरला, आणि जे काय टाईलचं लोड आहे ते डायरेक्टली जातं तुझं खालच्या जमिनीवर.
प्लिंथ बीमचा पण नाही जाणार का?
प्लिंथ बीम वरती पण नाही येणार. कसं येणार प्लिंथ बीम वर? डायरेक्टली ते जमिनीवर रेस्ट होत आहेत ना टाईल्स तुझे.
ओके ओके. हा
हा. Okay, so this is for the load calculation coming from slab. Now from beams, there are beams also along with the slabs. So again, the length of the beams which we have considered, it will be half length. I will go back to the diagram again. Just keep in mind these names of the beams: EF, BF, GF, and KF. Okay, it is always BF. So this much length of the beam only we have to consider, because the remaining half length beam, the load will go on this column. Okay, this remaining area load will go on B. Remaining area load will go on B. Okay. Similarly here from EF beam, the half of the load from this beam will come on F. Similarly in this direction, this is the total beam I have considered. Instead of JF, I have considered KF, the longer length beam, and half of the beam load is considered acting on F. And similarly from this side, half of the length of the beam I will consider the load from that will act on column F. Okay, so the values will be, length will be EF equal to 1.5, BF is also 1.5, GF is also 1.5, and KF is 2 meter because S5 slab has a dimension 4 meter by 3 meter. So KF is 2 meter. So total length coming is 6.5. So again we will calculate the load which is acting on a beam. On beam, the self weight of the beam is there, weight of the wall is there, and weight of parapet wall. I will discuss this later on. So self weight is 25B into D. Now here we do not consider the unit width for beam. For beam we consider the entire width for design. So 25 into 0.23 by 0.5, this is the dimension given in the problem. This is the self weight of the beam. Then weight of the wall. Now this is the unit weight of the material, that is the brick material. Then the width of the wall as 0.23 into, sorry, the thickness of the wall as 0.23 into the height. Now height, floor to floor height is already given as 3 meter, and our beam is having a depth of 0.5 meter. The wall will be constructed up to the bottom of the beam. So the height of the wall will be 3 minus 0.5, 2.5. Okay, so this is the height of the wall, 2.5. So we are getting the weight of the wall as 11.50. Now weight of parapet wall, though it is mentioned in the problem, that weight is not acting on our column. So if you consider this particular diagram again, this is the interior column, and the parapet wall normally runs along the periphery of the structure. ओके, इथं मध्ये कुठेही रूफ वरती किंवा टेरेस वरती वॉल नसतात मध्ये मध्ये, right? The parapet wall runs always along the periphery of the structure, and this is your interior column. Suppose you have been designing the G column, then you need to consider the load coming from parapet. Okay, here there will be no load acting on a parapet, acting from parapet wall. So the load from parapet wall is considered as nil. So what is the load, total load coming from the beam? The self weight 2.875 multiplied by total length 6.5. Okay, this load is in kilonewton per meter and this is the length. So if I will multiply, I will get the total load in point load. Okay, now 6.5 multiplied by 4. Why 4? Again, I will go back to the diagram. Why 4? This is the length of the beam, right? So there are the beams at plinth level, beams at floor level, 1, 2, 3. So 1, 1, 2, 3, 4. At all these 4 levels, whatever the beams we are considering, their self weight will act on the column. So the self weight multiplied by the total length multiplied by number of floors on which the beams are to be considered. It is 4. Now weight of the wall. Where we are constructing the walls? The wall will be constructed above plinth, above first floor, or at first floor, at second floor. So 1, 2, 3. From 3 different levels there is a wall. So the weight of the wall will be multiplied by 3. Okay, so this is 11.50 multiplied by the length, it's 6.5 multiplied by 3. So it is total is coming as 299 kilonewton. Is it clear how the load from beam is calculated? See, I'm just explaining you all these because this is the approximate method. For your term work, you are not supposed to do such type of calculation. But if it is asked in the examination, while solving the problem based on the design of a column, if such type of problem will be asked, you can use approximate method because there is a limited time period within which we have to finish the column design. Okay, practically also we do not do this method. We actually start from the designing of slab, then beam, and then we go to the column. Is it clear to everybody? So the total load will be, this is the load coming from the slab, this is the load coming from beam. So total load is 517.4. Factored load after multiplying the partial safety factor of 1.5, we are getting 775 I'm still increasing it further to the higher rounded value of 800 kilonewton, because this will ease my calculations and it will again make my design conservative, not economical, but okay. So this is the load acting on the column. Now once you know what is the load acting on a column, the further steps are easy. Next step is to finding the effective length. Now see the statement I have written here: to be on safer side, designing the column for load below plinth beam and length of the ground floor column is to be considered. I have already explained this, that if I'm considering the total load acting on a column, or if I'm designing a column below the plinth level, I should use the length of the column below plinth. But that length is normally always provided lesser. Depends. It depends upon the condition, how you are at what level or at what depth you are providing the foundation. Okay, so in this particular example, the depth is lesser, or the length of the column below the plinth level is lesser than the floor column. So I'm considering the ground floor column length for the design purpose. So what is the unsupported length? Now unsupported length of the column is calculated as 3 minus 0.5. Now why this is 0.5? Can anybody explain me?
Depth of beam.
Correct. We always calculate the unsupported length below the shallower beam. Okay, this clause we have already discussed yesterday. So the total floor to floor height is given as 3 meters. So subtracting the depth of the beam from this, we will get the total unsupported length of the column. Now for this, the effective length is to be calculated. Now if you refer Annex E, the effective length for both ends hinged is actually equal to 1 times the unsupported length. Okay, so whatever is the unsupported length calculated here, the same will be my effective length, because I'm considering the both ends as hinged. Practically, we never get any particular column in which the end of the column is having hinged support. Always we get a fixed ended columns. Both ends are fixed. But again, I'm making my design conservative, because I feel if I will consider both ends fixed, my effective length in that case will be 0.65 L. My length is getting reduced, and if my length will be reduced, my slenderness ratio will be less. My slenderness ratio, if it is less, my load carrying capacity will be more. Okay, this is the relation. And if my length is more, my slenderness ratio will be more, and if slenderness ratio is more, my load carrying capacity of a column will get reduced. As the slenderness ratio increases, load carrying capacity of column decreases. Always keep this in mind. Okay, so whenever we design, and if you are designing on a conservative side, we should consider the higher slenderness ratio value, so that our design load, or the load carrying capacity of the column will get reduced, and accordingly for that we are designing the column. So practically, though we are assuming the ends are hinged, practically they are fixed, and hence the effective length will be 0.65 L instead of L. In that case, your slenderness ratio will be lesser, and the load carrying capacity of the column will be higher. But we are designing the column for a lower capacity, so we are designing again on a conservative side. Okay, so you can consider for your turnock both ends fixed or both ends hinged. It is up to you. You decide. Okay, if you want to design it is for fixed, you can use fixed condition also. Practically, it is always fixed. So this is the slenderness ratio we are calculating. So for column to be short, keep in mind that we are designing only the short columns for this particular syllabus. So you have to take care that your column will be always a short, and for that this is the satisfying condition. Your slenderness ratio along both the direction should be less than 12. So find out the slenderness ratio along the depth or width, if I will consider. So L in both the direction, my effective length is same. So LE is 2500 divided by 12. Why 12? Because I don't know what is B and D initially. I have to decide the dimension, right? So I'm taking help of the slenderness ratio now. What is slenderness ratio? L by D or L by B, or Lx by D and Ly by B. That is the slenderness ratio. So I don't know what is D and B initially. So I'm keeping this unknown, putting L here and equating the term to 12. Okay. So I will get the value of D or B as 208.33. Okay. So your depth of the column should be equal to or greater than 208. Width should also be equal to or greater than 208. So if you are providing the same value along width and depth, you will get a square column. I want to design a rectangular column. So I will provide B as 230. I will keep the width of the column equal to the width of the beam. Okay. And D I will increase further to 300. I can increase to 250 also. Okay. So deciding these dimensions completely depends on the designer's choice. And what is the formwork dimensions available? That is also the practical requirement. When you design any particular structure, what is the common formwork size used? That is also taken into mind when we decide the dimension of the columns. Okay. So what is required? It should not be, the lateral dimension of the column should not be less than 208. If it is less, your column will not be short, it will be long column. Okay. And the long column design steps are different. You are learning right now the design of short columns. Is it clear to everybody how we have decided the dimensions?
Ma'am, can we take 208 only, sorry, or 209 only? If a formwork is available also, then
You can take, but it is very close ना. आता required 208 आहे आणि तू 209च प्रोव्हाइड केलास. हे डिझाईन मधलं आहे हा. प्रॅक्टिकली ऍक्च्युअल कन्स्ट्रक्ट करताना समजा 209 च्या ऐवजी 208च कन्स्ट्रक्ट झालं किंवा 207च कन्स्ट्रक्ट झालं तर
okay.
सो ऑलवेज गो टू द हायर साइड. 208 आहे ना, ठीक आहे, 220 तरी ऍटलिस्ट अज्युम कर.
Okay.
ओके. आणि आधी सोपं काय जाणार आहे मला, जर मी विड्थ ऑफ द बीम जेवढं आहे तेवढंच कॉलमचं ठेवलं तर माझं फॉर्म अजून सोपं होणार. राईट.
आणि ती डेप्थ पण जी डी आहे ना, कॅपिटल डी, ती सुद्धा मी तेवढीच ठेवली तर, कमी ठेवली तर
इट विल बी स्क्वेअर कॉलम, नो इश्यूज. शेप ऑफ द कॉलम डिपेंड्स ऑन अगेन अ डिझायनर्स चॉईस. तुम्हाला स्क्वेअर पाहिजे तुम्ही स्क्वेअर प्रोव्हाइड करा, रेक्टँग्युलर पाहिजे रेक्टँग्युलर करा.
म्हणजे 300 पेक्षा पण कमी ठेवता येते का? कारण आपण जेवढे प्रॉब्लेम घेतो त्याच्यात 300 किंवा 250 असं मिनिमम.
मी तेच सांगते ना, प्रॅक्टिकली कॉमनली यूज जे आकडे आहेत ना ते तुम्ही बघताय. प्रॅक्टिकली 300, 250. आता का बरं 250 आणि 300? कारण तुमची एक्सटर्नल वॉलची थिकनेस ही 250 असते किंवा कधी कधी 300 असते. मग तिथं ऑफसेट्स येत नाहीत. तुमच्या स्ट्रक्चर मध्ये, तुमच्या घरात तुम्ही बघा ना, तुम्हाला कॉलम आणि भिंत किंवा कॉलम आणि बीम मध्ये असं पटकन डिफरन्शिएट करता येतं का? बघितल्या नाहीये. तर ते सगळे तुमचे ऑफसेट्स हे मॅच करून एक प्लेन सरफेस मिळावा या दृष्टिकोनातनं हे केलेलं असतं. Okay, so the next step is finding longitudinal reinforcement. So this is the formula which we have yesterday discussed already. So Pu is equal to 0.4 FCK into Ag. By putting all these values in the equation, we don't have AC. So by making use of this equation, we will find out what is the area of the steel required in a longitudinal direction. So that is coming out as 223.83 mm square. Compare it with the minimum required, that is 0.8% of cross-sectional area, total cross-sectional area. That is coming as 552. So we have to provide 552. The minimum value is 552. So we will provide the minimum area as 552. So again, I will assume here that the minimum bar diameter is to be assumed as 12 mm, that is given in the code. So if I will assume 12 mm bar diameters, my number of bars are coming equal to 6. Minimum bars for rectangular or square columns should be 4, 1 bar in each corner. Okay, if after calculation, if suppose I have adopted 20 mm bar diameter, my number of bars will always obviously reduce. And if it is coming as say 3, then I have to provide 4. okay, as per the criteria. So you can reduce in that case the bar diameter, go to 16 bar and check how many number of bars are there. Again, when you find out the number of bars, it should be always in a even number format. It is always placed symmetrical about the longitudinal axis. Okay, so provide 6 numbers, 12 bars. And next is designing the lateral ties. So for lateral ties, the diameter criteria for diameter is already given, specified in IS code. The diameter of the tie should be higher of 1/4 of the diameter of the longitudinal bar or 6 whichever is the greater. So 6 is greater, so the diameter of the tie is provided as 6 Spacing should be lesser of the lateral dimension, least lateral dimension, or 16 times the bar diameter, longitudinal bar diameter, and 300 out of these three, whichever is the lesser value that we have to adopt. So the lesser is coming as 192. So 6 diameter lateral ties are provided at 190 center to center. So this is the diagram. Okay, 300 by 230. So the bars are provided in this fashion, one at each corner and two more here. So 3 on this side, 3 on this face, 2 on this face, 2 on this face. So this is symmetric. And again, this is the lateral tie, how it is provided. At the end, a complete closed loop is provided, and for inner 2 bars, an open link is provided like this. Okay, each and every bar should be connected by lateral ties. Okay, if you are not if you will not provide this specifically the lateral tie, there is a possibility that when a load is acting on this column from upward side, these bars may buckle out like this in this direction. Okay, they will try to go outside of this closed link. So to avoid that, it should be properly tied by using a lateral ties. Okay, is it clear, everybody? Design of column. Now all these earlier steps you will not require in your term work, because you are already designing slabs, you are already considering the load coming from slab to the beam, you are already designing beams, and you are already calculating reaction of each beam. So simply go on adding the reaction coming from all the beams at a specific column. Okay, suppose at particular column 3 beams are there, 3 beams are landing on that column or resting on that column. The reaction coming from all these 3 beams you have to add, and you have to consider that as an external load acting on a column. This is whatever I am explaining, it is only for one type of a column, that is axially loaded column. How to design the columns which are subjected to axial load along with movement, that we have not yet started. We already have 15 minutes, so shall I start? Introduction at least we will finish.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I will go to the next slides, that is design of axially loaded design of columns along with axial compression and uniaxial bending. Okay, now this is the diagram. By simply observing the diagram, you can clearly understand that the load is not exactly acting along the longitudinal axis of a column, and there is a certain distance between the longitudinal axis and the external load. That distance is nothing but eccentricity. Okay, so the column in this particular situation, the column is subjected to combined action of axial load Pu and bending moment Mu. Okay, now the if load is P and the distance is E, the moment will be calculated as P into E. Okay, so if the eccentricity is E of the loading, Mu is calculated as Pu into E. The behavior of such a member depends upon the amount of eccentricity or the magnitude of the bending moment. Now, if you consider the earlier example of completely or purely axially loaded column, the load is exactly acting at the longitudinal axis, and hence the strain developed across the cross section of a column is uniform. There is no variation in the strain value. Okay, either you consider along the width or along the depth, the strain is constant, and hence the stresses developed across the cross section are also uniform. But when a load is acting on a column through certain eccentricity, obviously the strain development will not be uniform across the cross section of the column. If you consider the same diagram here, the load is acting here at this particular point. It means the column portion very close to the external load is compressed more as compared to this part of the column. So the strain developed in this area in the column will be more and the strain in this part will be less. So the variation of the strain across the cross section of a column is not uniform when a column is subjected to combined action of bending as well as axial load. Okay. Now this variation of the strain depends upon what is the eccentricity in the loading. If the eccentricity is more, obviously the moment acting on a column will be more. If the moment is more, the load, whatever is the load for that, the behavior of a column will be different. And if the eccentricity is less, the moment is less, the behavior of the same column will be different. So considering depending upon the amount of eccentricity, there are 4 different cases in case of axial column compression and uniaxial bending columns. The first case is the concentric load or a zero eccentricity. Concentric load means it is similar to the axially loaded column. In this case, there is no eccentricity. Eccentricity is 0. It means there is no moment. Only external load P is acting. Okay, in this case, the depth of neutral axis of the column is normally outside the dimension of the column and it is considered as infinity. XU rather we cannot calculate in this case and hence it is taken as infinity. Second case is the one in which the neutral axis is lying outside the section. We can calculate the depth of XU, but it is outside the section. That is, XU is greater than the depth of the column D. Third case is that neutral axis lying along the edge. That is, XU is exactly equal to D. And fourth case is neutral axis lying within the section. That is, XU is less than D. Now, all these XU positions changes along with E value. You just can imagine E is 0, so XU is infinity. As there will be some value of E, XU will be greater than D. You will go to the second case. Again, if E goes on increasing, XU will become equal to D at a certain eccentricity. And again, if the eccentricity value increases, XU comes within the section. Okay, so all these locations of XU depends upon the eccentricity value, and hence there are 4 cases based on the amount of eccentricity of the load. Now let us consider what happens in all these 4 cases with the strain diagram and stress diagram, because obviously based on what is the strain value, what is the stress value, based on that only we have to design the column. Okay, but whatever the strain it is developed for that value or for that stress value, we always design the sections. So if this is the column having some dimension D and B, first case, that is, a load is concentric, that is, a load is exactly acting here at its longitudinal axis, the strain developed across the cross section of the column is uniform. So the strain diagram you can find out is like a rectangle. It is uniform throughout the depth of the section. And that strain value is taken as 0.002 as mentioned in the assumption given by the limit state method for collapse due to compression. Okay, the maximum strain in the extreme fiber is taken equal to 0.002 under compression. The stress diagram will also be uniform and the maximum stress is considered as the stress in concrete, which is 0.446 FCK. Now the second case is this, in which the neutral axis lies outside the section. Now here, this is the section and the neutral axis is lying somewhere here, which is outside the section. This is the location of the neutral axis and it is greater than D. In this case, obviously, now the neutral axis is lying here in this case. So the eccentricity or the strain developed, rather I should say, where is the location of the load? The load is acting somewhere here. Okay, and at this particular part the load is acting, so the compressive load in this region will be highest and in this region it will be lowest. So the strain developed in the column is maximum at this end, that is on the side of the load, and on the opposite side of the load the strain will be minimum. Now what is the strain value in this? It will range between these two. It is greater than 0.002, but it is less than 0.0035. Now what is this 0.0035? It is a strain developed in the column due to flexural action. So if there is a movement, there will be some strain developed due to that movement also. And that maximum value is 0.0035. So the strain developed in this particular column section will be the combination of strain developed due to load and developed due to bending moment. So the value ranges between 0.002, which is for pure compression, and 0.0035, which is for pure flexure. Okay, so this is the strain which ranges between these two values on the side of the load, and on the opposite side of the load, the eccentricity, the strain value will be minimum. Okay, what happens with the stress diagram? If you remember the stress diagram for the beam, if you imagine a cross section of a beam and whatever the stress diagram you have drawn, it is rectangular and then it becomes parabolic. It is the same diagram, same stress strain, because the assumptions are same for column also. The stress diagram will also remain same. So this is the stress distribution along the depth of the column. The maximum stress will be on the side of the load. Okay, and it will go on reducing on the opposite side. So this is for case 2. Now in case 2, what happens? There is very small eccentricity. Load is acting there, but with a very small eccentricity. And hence, the bending moment, whatever is developed due to this small eccentricity, is also having a very small amount. And because of the lesser value of the bending moment, the tensile stresses, see what happens when a moment is acting in any particular section, there will be a development of tension in that section. So if the quantity or amount of moment is small, the tensile stresses developed in the section will also be small. If the moment will go on increasing, the tensile stress will also go on increasing. Okay, now in this case, what is happening? The load is acting with a very small eccentricity, and hence there is no development of tensile stresses. Or in other terms, the tensile stresses are not predominant, rather the compressive stresses are predominant, and hence the strain diagram or the stress diagram completely shows the effect of compressive strain only. There is no impact or effect of tensile strain here. Okay, because the compressive stresses or compressive strains are predominant here, because the eccentricity in the loading is very less, and in that case this condition is actually there, that is XU is greater than D. Now the third case in which XU is equal to D. Now here there is a certain amount of eccentricity which is definitely more than that of the that of the earlier case. Okay, in this case again, how the strain diagram varies. See here, in this case, on the side of the load there is a strain developed. Now that strain is definitely more than 0.002, and rather I would say it is close to 0.003, because there is a sufficient amount of moment developed in the cross section. So in case number 3, the stress diagram, if we consider this, the strain diagram, if you consider, the maximum strain will be considered along the edge where the load is acting, and that strain value is taken as 0.0035. Okay, now the strain diagram actually is having a triangular shape in this case. Okay, and the maximum strain is 0.0035, which is along the highly compressed edge, that is on the load side, and on the opposite side it will be 0. Okay, now the stress block diagram will be like this. It is exactly similar to that of your beam, and the maximum stresses will be again along the load side. This is the third case, and fourth case is the one in which the eccentricity is much more increased now, and because of that increased eccentricity, the moment acting on a column is also high, and in that case a sufficient amount of tensile stresses are also developed in the column. So the strain diagram is also triangular here, but it is of double triangular nature. It is a lower triangle and upper triangle, and normally this particular portion represents the compressive stresses and this portion represents tensile stresses. So again, The maximum strain developed will be limited to the maximum amount for flexure, that is 0.0035, and it varies linearly up to the point where there is the minimum compressive strain. Beyond that, whatever is the strain value, it is a tensile strain. Okay, so for this region there are compressive strains, and here in this region there are tensile strain. So whenever there are compressive strain, we represent the stress block diagram or stress diagram corresponding to compressive strain only for column. So in this region only there are compressive strain, so the stress block diagram will end here and there will be no stress, or these stresses we are not considering because we are designing a column na, it is for compressive action, not for tension. Okay, so we have to consider the stresses developed in this region only for the design purpose. Okay, I hope all these four cases are clear to you, and these same consideration or diagram is shown here combined in this diagram. So for first case, that is when eccentricity is 0, your strain diagram is rectangular. When the second case is considered, that is the XU is greater than depth somewhere here, the strain diagram is triangular like this, and the maximum strain value is 0.002. Third case is that when the XU is along the edge, so XU is here, so this is the particular strain diagram in which the maximum strain is considered as 0.0035. And the fourth case is that your strain sorry, the compressive strain is developed, or the eccentricity is much higher. Because of that, the tension is developed in the column. So this portion represents tensile strain and this triangle represents compressive strain. So this all these diagrams which I have shown you individually are represented in a single diagram here. These are called as strain profiles for column. Okay. Now, depending upon the again the location of this eccentricity, the column fails in a different fashion, in different condition. Okay, and there are three major types of failure: balanced failure, compressive failure, and tensile failure. Now, obviously, when a column fails due to higher load, that is eccentricity is less, compressive load will be more, movement will be smaller. In that case, the column will fail due to compression only. The major failure is because of the crushing of the concrete. So that failure is called as compressive failure or compression failure. Second case is that when the eccentricity is high, the movement is high. Okay, and when the movement increases, the load will reduce. Okay, these are the interrelated parameters. So movement is high, load is lesser, so the column will fail due to tensile action. Tensile action means what? In this case, your steel will yield. Okay, and finally, initially your steel will yield, and then later on at the time of collapse, your concrete will crush. So final failure is ultimately considered as a crushing of concrete only. But in compression failure, steel does not yield. Steel provided inside the column, it does not yield at all. Compression failure indicates only the crushing of concrete. Whereas in tension failure, the steel yields and then concrete crushes and then the failure takes place. So this is the tension failure. Now in between these two types of failure, compression failure and tension failure, third type of a failure is considered, which is called as balanced failure. Now, in case of balanced failure, the yielding of steel and crushing of concrete takes place simultaneously. It means at the same time the steel is also yielding and the concrete is also getting crushed. That is called as a balanced failure. Okay. Now whatever the eccentricity of the load in case of balanced failure, that eccentricity is denoted by EB, E suffix B. B stands for balanced. Okay. So in case of compression failure, the eccentricity is less than EB, and in case of tension failure, the eccentricity will be always greater than EB. So eccentricity in the loading, if it is lesser than the eccentricity corresponding to balance failure, the failure is identified as compression failure. And the eccentricity in the loading, if it is greater than the eccentricity corresponding to balance failure, that failure is called as tension failure. Okay, these are the different ways how we can define the failure. So you just keep in mind that compression failure means concrete crushes first. steel does not yield. Tension failure means steel yields first and then concrete crushes, that is tension failure. And balance failure means both the material fails at the same time. Is it clear? Modes of failure in case of eccentric compression column.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, as I have discussed that the behavior of a column subjected to eccentric loading depends on the eccentricity. As the eccentricity goes on, moment increases. As eccentricity reduces, moment reduces. Now, as the moment acting on a column goes on increasing, the axial load carrying capacity of a column reduces. And when the moment is lower, the axial load carrying capacity of a column is high. So this P and M, P stands for axial load, M stands for moment, bending moment acting on a column. These are interrelated. Both these values are interrelated. And this interaction between these two is called as or is identified as PM interaction. Okay. And based on that, if we plot a diagram such that if we know the load value, I can find out moment, because I know that when load is higher, moment will be lower. When load is lower, moment will be higher. If I know this variation, I can plot a diagram. And if I know load, I can find out moment by making use of that diagram. Okay, so that diagram is called as PM interaction curve. And the design of the column subjected to bending, either uniaxial or biaxial, is done based on these PM interaction curves. Okay, it looks like somewhat like this. This is the PM interaction curve. So what is this curve? What are the details and everything? We will discuss in the next lecture. Okay, so let me give you now the attendance link in the chat box, and I will keep open this link further for 10 minutes. So all of you just give the attendance through this link, and we will stop today's lecture.